Would you kindly?
Is Wolfenstein the New Order worth getting? That's the question that we'll try and answer during this video accompaniment to the review, where I, Teflon, chat to Peter about the game. So, Peter, what is this game about? I think it's actually a sequel to the last Wolfenstein game, which came out in 2009.
Yes, this is a sequel to... That game was made by Raven, and this is a sequel made by Machine Games. It is not quite a direct sequel, but the prologue for this game, which sort of takes place just sort of shortly after the end of that 2009 game. It's set in the 1940s, the end of the Second World War, and so there are sort of characters and situations that will reoccur and come back into the storyline. It sort of folds around on itself. So in that game in 2009, you were fighting for like a group of independence fighters, or like freedom fighters, called the Wiseau Circle, I think, and they've sort of come back around and feature later on in this new game as well. So it's not really like a direct sequel, but it does reference back to that 2009 game.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I've played the first few hours for previews, but it's quite a long prologue and opening before you actually get to the title screen. And
yeah.
But so it starts off in the 1940s. And it's sort of like an alternate history at this point already because of all of the crazy experiments the Nazis are doing.
Yeah.
And then it skips ahead a long time. It jumps all the way forwards to the 1960s where tech has advanced, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, the prologue of it is, like I say, it's set sort of towards the end of the Second World War. But obviously, as you mentioned, the Nazis... Because Wolfenstein's always kind of dabbled in the Nazis having this weird sort of supernatural fascination.
Yeah, and Hitler's got his robot suit and stuff.
Mecha Hitler. So the timeline that we know from history has sort of altered slightly, but the end of this game sees it kind of alter even more. So at the end of the prologue, not the end of the game, the end of the prologue sees it alter even more. So at the end of the prologue, the character you play, who's called BJ Blazkowicz, he is injured, and then he gets kind of rescued but taken to a hospital. And then the game progresses, and I think it's 14 years between the prologue and the sort of meat of the game. So we get into the 1960s, but you see that transition through his eyes, and he's in like a vegetative state in this nursing home. And then by the end of that, sort of when he comes around, the Second World War didn't actually play out the way we know it played out, so the Nazis won. So they basically now they control the whole world. They took over everything, and they dropped an atomic bomb on Manhattan. So the UK and Russia and China and Japan and America, and they've all basically surrendered to the Nazis, and Nazis control the whole globe. But obviously BJ Blazkowicz does not like this. So he sort of wakes up from his kind of vegetative state straight into the action again. And then obviously he sort of finds these new bits of technology around the place, and he has like newer weapons and stuff. So it's kind of a weird alternate realities 1960s where the Nazis have developed like these big robot, like we joked about Mecha Hitler, but they have that sort of same sort of mech walkers and big robot dogs that can attack you and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, those even feature back in the 1940s. But in terms of gameplay, it felt to me like a kind of mix between new and old. So you've got health pickups. In terms of Wolfenstein, there's a few callbacks to like you're picking sausages up off plates, and that gives you more health. But then you've also got like kind of sandbox environments for each individual fight and secret passages to find, that kind of thing, haven't you?
Yeah, it's quite clever in that the prologue that's set in the 1940s is like traditional Wolfenstein, and a lot of that is basically corridors, and you have one direction to go, and you go in that direction, and people
you do literally invade a castle.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly that. But it is also very linear and very tight. And then when you've been through the transition and you're now in the 1960s, it kind of opens up a little bit more. So it is a little bit sort of sandboxy, and there's commanders that you'll get. If you can manage to kill the commanders stealthily without being spotted, then that sort of unlocks intelligence on your map. And it levels up. You have like a leveling system where you'll get better at certain styles of gameplay depending on how much you do them, which is quite nice. So you can approach these sandboxes stealthily, and they are quite reasonably large sort of rooms, almost like a challenge room, that you can pick your way around, killing the soldiers and the commanders as stealthily as possible. Or you can just go in guns blazing. Now, if you kill those, if you do it stealthily, then you have far less to deal with. If you go in and alert one of the commanders, he sounds an alarm, and that calls reinforcements, and things get then quite heavy.
Yeah.
But so it is really, you do have that kind of traditional side of things, and it sort of leans on that more in the early section, in the prologue, in the 1940s section, which I think was quite a clever way of approaching it. And it makes the prologue feel like you're sort of earning the right to play in the later. It sort of makes the game evolve the same way the storyline and the timeline is all evolving. But having said that, it also does feel kind of old-fashioned sometimes, in the sense that, as you say, most of the health is pick-up. You do have a little bit of regenerated health, so I think in increments of like 20% of your health, or like blocks of 20 up to 100,
right,
it will regenerate. So if your health gets knocked down to like 8 and you manage to find cover, it will go back up to 20. And
yeah, well,
stop.
I mean, you can also do the classic overcharge of your health. I
Yes.
think you can go up to... I can't remember exactly how far you can
think
go
I've been
but
up
you can
to-
overcharge your health.
Yeah, I think I've been up to
armor
140 on the
Right,
health,
yeah.
overcharging. But that overcharges to 140 and then it gradually counts down again to 100, or to whatever your max health is, because there are max health upgrades as well.
Right.
Depending on which path you take. And that's kind of the other big thing about this Wolfenstein game, is that it has two different timelines, two different stories. So towards the end of the prologue, you'll make a decision. You sort of meet the game's big baddie, who's Death's Head, who also appeared in the previous Wolfenstein game.
Yeah, he's been around a few times,
Yeah.
hasn't he?
He's kind of the evil Nazi experimenter. And in the course of that encounter, you have a choice to make between two of your companions. And depending on which one you choose, then you have slightly different storylines to follow. So that will encourage a replay once you finish the game.
Right, yeah.
But it also gives you different things. Like, I think the one that I chose and I'm playing the main of the game with gives me access to hot wiring things and gives me health upgrades. And I think the other guy I think he gives me like lockpicking abilities and possibly armor upgrades. So you'll have slightly different playstyles, but also the storyline later on changes. Apparently I haven't got too far with the second character yet, but there is this sort of branching system early on, which is quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of that story, like, you obviously have the more serious side of things, but then you've also got the kitsch 1960s era. You've got there's like a lot of humorous elements to it as well, which it switches between those and the creepier moments in the story, doesn't it?
Well, it has some quite tense moments, I think. It because it has this stealth aspect to it, and it's not stealth in the sense of like Metal Gear Solid or something like that. It's still very much first person. It's a first person shooter, but you are encouraged to try and be stealthy at certain points, and there are certain points where it feels quite tense and claustrophobic because of that. And then there are a few sort of key moments that I've encountered that are almost like they funnel you into this sort of sense of tension, and then they give you something to jump at. So it's quite clever in the way that works. But then, as you say, there is sort of a humorous side to it as well. And most of that is manifested, I find, with, at every possible opportunity, BJ Blazkowicz just, like, his sole motivation is that he just wants to kill Nazis. There's no, like, there is a little bit of an emotional tie in there as well, but he never actually really speaks about that. He's always just like, as long as I'm killing Nazis, I'm okay. And there are parts of the storyline where other characters will say to you, right, we'll wait here, you go kill all the Nazis, and then come back and get us. Just go kill all the Nazis. And it's like, okay, that's, it's kind of a little bit retro in that you just have to go into an area and kill everything.
Well, I guess it's a bit better than having an AI stomping around while you're trying to be stealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Although that is perhaps one of the lower points of the game, is that the AI doesn't seem particularly clever. That's also somewhere where it feels a little bit sort of retro, in the sense that they will just stand up and run at you, or they'll find cover and they do take cover, but there's not an awful lot of flanking going on. It's more sort of a, right, there's our target and we'll all run towards it. I don't mind that. I think some people prefer sort of more complex AI stuff in first-person shooters. I think that Wolfenstein has never really been about that, and this still feels like a Wolfenstein game. But they are being quite clever with what they're doing with the stealth stuff and making the sort of play areas a little bit larger as well.
Now, you've been playing on PlayStation 4.
Yes.
And this game is actually using the id Tech 5 engine, which is which we first saw in Rage. Now, I assume there's none of the crazy pop-in that we saw in Rage on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. But do you think it holds up to what people expect of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4?
I don't think that it's... I think there are moments where it looks really fantastic.
Right.
I think there are some moments where it really doesn't. It still looks a little bit rough around the edges. And we do actually still have some of that pop-in that we saw with Rage. It's not nearly as bad, but it is still there. It is still noticeable when sort of levels are loading in. And when you just go into a new area and it sort of all loads, it maybe takes a second, and you can notice it if you're watching for it. But in terms of the way the game, like, I've not experienced any sort of slowdown. There's been no frame rate problems. Certain levels, but just because of the nature of Wolfenstein, are quite manic. Quite a lot of enemies, quite a lot of explosions, quite a lot going on. A lot of sort of running about and circle strafing. It copes fine with that. So I think that from a technological standpoint, there is obviously further they could go. But there have been several moments so far that have sort of shown that the potential is definitely there. Just maybe not quite reached with this one.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should wrap things up. And all things considered, do you think this is a game that people should be paying attention to as it comes out later this week?
I think, yes, I think absolutely. It's not... I don't think it's not perfect. It's not going to set the world alight. It's not a game that people will be talking about probably in 10 years' time. But it's fun. It's, if you played previous Wolfenstein games or even previous id games like Doom or the Quake games, it's a little bit nostalgic for those. There's a very powerful shotgun in it, which is very nice.
People love those shotguns.
Yeah, that's kind of an id trademark. It's an automatic shotgun, and you can dual wield. So you can have two automatic shotguns going at the same time, which is just death in front of you. So yeah, I think if you like the kind of more traditional first-person shooters, and Wolfenstein has appealed to you in the past, then it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for. Like I say, I don't think it's not going to win many awards, but it's certainly, and especially with there not being that many games around at the moment for the new consoles, it's certainly worth keeping an eye on. Certainly worth a go. It is only a single-player experience, but the campaign... So I still haven't quite finished the campaign before I write the review, so I'm led to believe that it can be 15 to 20 hours long, and there are a lot of collectibles in it, and then there is that alternative timeline as well. So you should get plenty of playtime out of it. And it's like a big summer popcorn movie. There's nothing too much to think about. It is just running around shooting Nazis. And, if you're of a simpler disposition, then that's perfectly all right. I very much enjoy that, personally. So, yeah, I think that people definitely should be paying attention to it.